All right, so what we want to do now is talk in more detail about metrics and how people are measuring the contributions of scholars. So we've heard lots about publishing journals, publishing data, the cost of publishing, peer review in publishing, and now we're moving towards how we assess people and scholars. And one growing trend is to develop and use or not use metrics associated with assessing scholars, and that's what this session is focusing on. I am not Jason Preem. Unfortunately, Jason could not make it here, so he's not going to be speaking, but we will do awesome without him. Our first speaker is Molly McCarthy from UC Davis, who has been working on assessment of metrics related to the humanities and a working group on that, and I think she's going to tell us in more detail about that working group and some of their findings.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm very pleased to be here on a panel on Altmetrics. So I'm curious to know who's in the crowd, specifically if you are in a humanities or humanistic social sciences field. Would you raise your hand? Yay. Okay, you guys can help me on this topic. I want to, just to fill a little bit in on my bio or my professional bio. I'm the Associate Director of the Humanities Institute here at UC Davis, and in that capacity, I actually don't have a faculty, it's not a faculty appointment. I have a PhD in American history, and I also publish, but I don't, at least in terms of my own merit review, publishing isn't as critical, which gives me a bit of freedom, which you'll see, and maybe it's good that I don't have to answer to a tenure and promotion committee. But the reason that I am here, well, I guess, and I should admit too that I don't know much about Altmetrics. So why am I here? As you can see on the screen, I was involved and invited to participate in a working group administered by the UC Humanities Research Institute at UC Irvine. This working group was part of a longer 3-year program funded by the Mellon Foundation on humanities and the changing conceptions of work. So the program is very broad, and in many of the working groups and the work that they did, summer institutes, fellowships, was really geared toward helping faculty who work on work, immigrant labor, and other kinds of work, help them do their own research and connect with and network across disciplines, so a lot of collaborative efforts there. But the other thing that the Mellon Foundation was very interested in having us do was to reverse the lens and look at the ways in which work in the humanities is changing. So this working group was assembled across the UC system at all levels of faculty and administration. There were deans of humanities, a senior administrator in the Office of Academic Affairs at the Office of the President in Oakland. So, somebody who really has the power to change, or one would presume, had the power to change the way these things work, assessment works on campuses. And many faculty who, directors of humanities institutes and faculty who are coming from fields such as public history, digital humanities, some of these areas where it's becoming much more clear that we need to expand the way we assess the products of our scholars. So a pitch For the culminating conference that you see up here on the screen, that will be at Berkeley in May, early May. We'll have more information, or UCHRI will be distributing more information about what that conference will look like. But it will be a really nice way, and maybe a complement to some of the conversations that are happening here, to the way that the work of the humanities is changing. So just to tell you a little bit about the actual findings of the working group. So the working group, my working group was titled Training and Assessment in the Humanities. And so two areas of interest, or two themes that really animated the discussion among, over the course of a year. The conversations really focused around two areas, and that was digital technology and the opportunity to create new research methods, new types of products, new channels of communication. And the other area was publicly engaged teaching and scholarship. So with these two areas or themes, our mission was really to reflect on the effects of technology and the need for public engagement on the scholarly work in the humanities, and to think about the appropriate responses to these changes, both in terms of how faculty work is assessed and rewarded, and how students who aspire to professional work, i.e. our graduate students, should be trained. So although the question of impact was a concern for the working group, you will not find altmetrics mentioned in the white paper that was produced out of this discussion. So what our working group seemed to be fighting for was just getting faculty tenure and promotion committees to give credit to things other than print. That's not to say that altmetrics shouldn't be considered among humanists, and I guess here I will say, so if altmetrics aren't being adopted for promotion and tenure review, what is it that tenure and promotion committees are looking at and hiring committees are looking at? Diane mentioned some of these this morning. Peer review is a theme or a thread throughout many of these measures, and they would be external reviewers. So letters of support or letters from external reviewers, and especially in tenure dossiers. Book reviews, how is your work received? The prestige of the press or the publisher that publishes your first and second and subsequent books. Awards, have you received awards for your publications, for your journal articles? What I hear from faculty is that it's not necessarily quantity, but quality in the number of journal articles. So less a bean counting perspective. It's not that you've published 15 articles, it's you published 3 articles in the journal in our field. And that seems to mean more than the number of articles that are published. So the challenges, some of the challenges for adopting altmetrics in the humanities, I wanted to have fun just at the expense of my faculty director, David Beal, who isn't here but gave me permission to do this. I had a little fun and plugged his name into Google Scholar. Just to see what would come up. And again, I know I'll probably learn from my fellow panelists exactly what I'm doing wrong here, which brings up another issue is if we're going to use these tools, who's going to train us to use them? So I'm probably doing this all wrong. But you can see David Beal, who is the new director of the Humanities Institute at UC Davis, former chair of our history department. He has many books, has been publishing for over 20 years, is a well-respected cultural or historian of Jewish culture. You can see here that his book, Eros and the Jews, published in 1992, was cited 318 times. But what David and I discovered in drilling down into that number was how do you contextualize those citations? So what's the context? If you drill down into those citations, what he discovered was, I mean, one of them is actually one of his students, mentioning him in an acknowledgement section. So is that a real citation? Not really. Is it that somebody, quotes David's work in their introduction and says, he's great, I think he's exactly right, and here's why? Or is it, he's full of it, and and here's why? And so how do we actually consider what these citations mean? Is it the number that that is most critical here, or is it the meaning behind these citations, to get a sense of what impact means? So David seems to be kind of an easy case. There's a lot of material here to mine and to figure out where he stands in his field. Then just for the heck of it, I threw in my name, which unfortunately, and I can't even scroll down here, let's see, to find the one article. So McCarthy is a common name, right? And so I come up with a really messy result. And I have to scroll down like towards the end of the page to see an article that I wrote for the New England Quarterly back in 2000. So, which is great. It's cited by 21 people. That's not 300 and blah, 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 blah. That's fine. So I'm glad to see that it's cited by 21 people. But what is not reflected here is actually I've been pretty busy in the last year. I've published a book by Chicago University Press. I've published articles in the last year by the New York Times. I've written a blog for Bloomberg News. I've written in a couple of peer-reviewed journals, Boom, a California journal. They're just not here, and I'm not sure why that is. It might be that they're on subsequent pages. It might be it's just hidden because my name is so common among scientists. And the other thing is that the one article that I would say, so there's a sense of lag time, right, too, that my article's just out. If I was a junior faculty member up for tenure, there's really not much to go on here, and that would concern me. It seems to work a little bit more efficiently for people who have been at this a longer time. Than somebody who would be new and fresh and emerging like me. But I also want to say that there's an article that I wrote back in the fall of 2010 for an online early American history journal called Commonplace, comparing the early American almanac to the iPhone. And I have to say, hands down, it's had huge impact. I hear from people at conferences, on email, when I say, how did you hear about my work? Oh, I saw that almanac piece, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, really? This was, and it was picked up by the New York Times Week in Review section as a must read of the week. So it was retweeted, and, and that, again, is also not on here. So I guess I'm a little nervous about giving ourselves over to this metric, especially in a book or in a book field like history or like English, and wonder, the limitations. So these are some of the pragmatic challenges to altmetrics in a humanities or book-based field. There are other, more philosophical ones, and these again were mentioned this morning by Diane, including the conservative culture of tenure and promotion committees, the idea that change is really slow, and that there seems to be little push, at least from above, to change the mode of evaluation. On the topic, or on the topic of slow, this white paper, we completed a draft nearly a year ago, and we're still circulating it for comments. It's not seen the light of day. And I can actually only show it to you like this because I haven't been given permission to circulate it. So, it's a little discouraging to think that all of that work, and I think that we did some good work and made some progress, but that it just isn't even out there yet. And I think that's because these areas are just so fraught. I mean, that they're just very, very tense issues, and I think everyone is very fearful of creating pushback or muddying or just getting people upset about the direction we need to move in. So are faculty aware of the potential for altmetrics in my field and humanities fields for hiring decisions, choosing journal editors? I'd say no. In general, they're not aware, although I would like to hear from the people in the audience in those fields. I'm here quoting a faculty member who's currently engaged in a hiring and a search committee in their department, and I'm quoting them by saying, if I go to this hiring meeting and start talking about this, my colleagues will think I've fallen off the moon. So I guess, you know, that's not to say that metrics, if they were somehow standardized. I heard some interest in using this as a tool, that it would be a really useful tool in evaluating faculty research, but it should be one of many. So going back to our working group recommendations, because we did come up with several recommendations at the end of this white paper, what I found interesting was that, and again, this is on the topic of change, that the working group did not recommend any changes to the academic personnel manual that governs the way tenure and promotion in general works across the UCs, because they felt that it had sufficient leeway to allow for changes at the local level. And that's really where the change needs to happen. So among the recommendations of the working group was initiating department-level discussion of the evaluation of scholarship, that the department is the, quote, best place to begin conversations about how traditional assessment practices should be adapted or extended to treat new types of work equitably. So, and in addition, the working group found that in preparing digital work or publicly engaged scholarship as part of a personal dossier, that, quote, it is the responsibility of the candidate to make it clear to evaluators how the work meets the standards. But this requires departmental and institutional evaluators to make those standards clear to the candidates. Now, you know, I think I'm fine with a bottom-up approach, but I do think it's unfair and a bit unrealistic to put the onus on individual faculty, and in particular, junior faculty. I mean, as Diane mentioned, that some of the more conservative people they spoke to were junior faculty who, you know, it's in their interests. They're encouraged, they're pressured, whatever word you want to use, and indoctrinated to toe the line on these issues. And I just don't think that by relying on individual faculty to make this change, that change will come. So thank you.
I need my glasses. I can't
You want
see.
to do it?
I think this dongle might be the wrong dongle. In which case, I need my glasses, but I might also need.
No, it'll go.
Oh, well, okay, thanks. Hello. Does it come up?
There. All right.
Thanks for your faith, Mackenzie.
Just breathe. All right. Next up is Nettie
Lagasse.
Lagasse. Oh, wow. I wasn't even close. Nettie Lagasse.
Actually, you were.
Okay. Compared to others.
Yes.
From the National Information Standards Organization, which has been working on assessing metrics.
I'll talk about it,
You'll
yeah.
tell us about it.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for inviting NISO to be a part of this very interesting, very just I'm learning so much. So I want to talk to you a little bit about an initiative that has been underway at NISO since, I'd say, the late fall, and it's a two-phase project, and we're partway through the first phase. So just to give you a little bit of background, what is NISO? NISO is the National Information Standards Organization, and I should also confess that these slides don't have too many graphics and are a bit text-heavy. I apologize for that. As a standards organization, we are required to make our materials as dry as possible. So that's just the excuse for that. However, to say a little bit about the organization, some of you are familiar with us, and I know you, and I'm very happy that you are involved with NISO. But just in case you don't know what NISO is, it is a nonprofit industry trade association, and when I meet people at cocktail parties, that's what I say I do. It is accredited by ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, and I'll say a little bit about that. That's a very important accreditation for us. And we have about 150 members, libraries, library associations like ALA, ASIST, and system vendors, publishers, people and organizations who create databases that manage and hold and transfer information in all kinds of data in all kinds of forms. And our main mission is to develop and maintain these standards and recommended practices in this area of information and documentation. Another role that we are we put a lot of emphasis on and we take very seriously is that NISO is the U.S. Entity that represents this area, information and documentation, to ISO, the International Standards Organization. ISO has a technical committee, TC46, which manages ISO world standards in this area, and we represent and convey the U.S. interests for all the ISO activities, so that's also a very important role for us. You may be familiar with some of our standards. If you're a librarian, you probably know very well the Z39.50. That's our most famous standard, for better or worse. But also ISSN. If you have a book or you've bought anything from Amazon, you know that there's ISBNs, and that's also a fairly common standard that we are involved in, especially at the ISO level. So other standards that you may or may not know, we manage and maintain them. Also, something that I would like to highlight is NISO, staff-wise, is really, really small. There's only 5 of us. And staff-wise, however, I consider that our organization has a very large reach, mainly because the work that is done by volunteers, members of a community or communities who believe that the things we are doing are important and want to participate and put in their own viewpoints and their own perspectives. And this is something that we foster, that we're designed for, that one of the big elements of my job is to communicate and maintain that kind of conversation with people who could be involved with NISO. So something I would like to encourage from all of you is that we do invite your participation and your input, and I'll be talking a little bit about that coming up. So just a few slides about what are standards. Something in NISO that we think about is the idea of consensus standard. So there's sometimes standards which sort of someone creates something and says, this is something I want to put forth as a standard. But at NISO, we create consensus or voluntary standards that are created by a number of different stakeholders who, for better or worse, sometimes it's harder in some situations, come to agreement eventually on what something is going to be and how it will be rolled out. We believe that standards ultimately create a community and a environment of trust and allow people and businesses to move forward with a common understanding of what something means. And it will also, standards also eventually lead to broader acceptance. You might also think of standards as the things that work behind the scenes. Ideally, all those standards that I named on the last slide are things that you shouldn't have to think about if you're a user of these systems, because they're simply making the interoperability move a little bit more fast and ultimately allow you to do whatever it is you need to do. And I mentioned before ANSI, the American National Standards Institute. We are accredited by ANSI, and they review our work and the way that we track things every 4 years. So we just went through an ANSI audit this year, and these are the elements that are very important to them, and we keep track of all of these things. So making sure that there's openness and there's a lot of communication, so that's something we're emphasizing in the Altmetrics project. So Altmetrics, as you may know or probably do know, alternative metrics, other means of assessing scholarship. This idea to create a NISO project came out of a breakout session at a meeting hosted by ACM a few years ago. Todd Carpenter, who's my boss, the executive director at NISO, attended that meeting and had some very fruitful conversations with the members there and approached Sloan Foundation, thank you, Josh, with a opportunity or a proposal to do some further work in this area. Something that I want to emphasize here is when Sloan awarded us this grant, and in our documents, what we want to do is help facilitate the adoption of Altmetrics. So everything that we're doing in conjunction with this is with that as a basis, and the idea that the development of community consensus standards or recommended practices can help address any gaps. And so our main effort in this is to identify and prioritize what's needed to move this area forward, and how can standards and recommended practices help the adoption of Altmetrics. Why is it worth funding? What's going on in this area? Everyone here knows how a critical assessment is to the overall scholarly process. It decides which projects get funded, who gets promoted, and tenure, although I think the conversation this morning gave me a lot more food for thought in that area, and how publications are promoted and how libraries collect things, et cetera, and so on. We know that assessment has been based on citation for a very long time, not the 1660s, as Greg was talking this morning about the publications process, but at least the 1960s. And there's a lot of kinds of interactions that scholars are working on today, as we've heard through this meeting, that may not be effectively counted. And how can we communicate about those better and move them forward? So the idea with our project is that Altmetrics need to coalesce around community definitions. They need to be audited. Everyone needs to understand what they mean. Molly, I think, named a few of those concerns very well in her talk a little earlier. And organizations who want to apply them need to understand them. So when you're getting metrics from a variety of places, what do they mean in different areas? I'm going to skip what's to standardize and talk a little bit about the project itself. And the slides will be available. I'll put them on SlideShare immediately following this so you can get access to that. The project is devised in 2 phases. And the first, I'd say, is an exploratory phase where we're finished now holding meetings of stakeholders. We've had 3 meetings. One was in October in San Francisco that was connected to the PLOS ALM meeting. And so I'd say those were a fairly techie group talking about what's needed in this area. The December meeting in Washington, D.C. was unfortunately the day after a snowstorm, and that affected the attendance, I'd say. But it was a conversation with libraries, funders, and those parties. We had a meeting in Philadelphia just before the American Library Association, and right now what we're doing is putting together materials for public webinars to engage a larger audience, get more input. The output of this will be a white paper that will be circulated for further conversation and input, and then a phase 2 will start after that later on this fall that will ideally create a working group within the NISO structure to create a recommended practice or standards in this area. And we'll be putting together, the project will close, the grant-funded part will close in November 2015. All of our material is available from the NISO website. If you go to niso.org, it's the second link. The link to the Altmetrics project is the second link on the main area of the page, so you should be able to connect to that very easily. We've been posting all of the output from the meetings, including the videos. And if you want to sit through 8 hours of video, you can do that. I think someone did this morning. I saw a tweet that implied that someone had watched all of the video, so it's done. They outputs the notes, the brainstorming from this. There is a steering committee as part of this project, so many of these names, some of you who are here, have been participating in the planning and structure of these meetings, steering the conversation in particular areas or not, as the case may be, and then helping to plan the activities after this. The meeting formats, brainstorming in the morning, getting everyone warmed up. The afternoon discussion group, so just something to say very quickly, is that the audiences in the three meetings were very different, really different groups of people, although some people did attend all three. And the format was that people wrote down on Post-it notes what problems or what areas they see, and then we grouped them and then formed groups to discuss those a little bit in more depth. And these are the areas which I'd say sort of in a general sense covered most of the conversation, if not all. So business and use cases were discussed at all of them. Qualitative and quantitative measures, how can these be assessed? Data integrity, how do we know what's real and being gamed? Definitions, that's kind of a standard thing that you talk about in standards. And how can we ensure that this work will endure going forward? In our next steps, and this is my last slide, we're in the process right now of reviewing and processing all this input from the three meetings, and we will be reviewing all the videos and the notes and so on. Because the December meeting was impacted by the weather, we are scheduling some further one-on-one conversations with different stakeholders. If you're interested in participating in that, let me know. I'd be happy to arrange a follow-up with you. We will be circulating opportunities to input. We have a little tool called Idea Scale that allows us to put out ideas and have people respond to them. We'll be publishing the white paper, so look for that, and then finalizing the white paper and moving on into actual work in the fall. And that's phase 2. That's the end. Thank you. Sorry, the clock is.
I know that clock's
The
wrong.
clock is
Pay no attention
dead.
to that.
Oh. Whose
I
computer?
don't think he has slides, but you wanted to show a demo, right?
No, I'm going to do slides.
Oh, okay.
Then do you want to use, oh, you got your computer, okay.
They're on here.
I'll trade places with you. You come over here. Our next speaker is the force of nature behind Google Scholar, Anurag Acharya, who had told me this morning he wouldn't have slides, but I guess he does now. So give us a second to switch them out. Are they on this computer?
Yeah.
Okay.
My
You don't
apologies.
need that. Oh, you do? Do you
The
need?
age is catching up with me. I don't-
Is it, Jonathan, is this your computer?
No, it's Allison.
Is Allison's
Is it
computer?
on the net?
I don't need to.
Do you need to be on?
No, I do not need to. be
Okay.
on that. Pen is over there. I just- Yep. And voila. Hi, I am Anurag Acharya. I would like to thank Jonathan for giving me the opportunity of speaking here. I was under the impression I'm going to speak for 5 minutes. So I didn't actually put together these slides. These are slides that I had for a different presentation. But turns out, given the other talks, may very well fit well. Just to dispel the thought that I could put together these slides in the 2 hours that I had. So Scholars, from its inception, had focused on helping people find articles. What I'm going to talk here is helping people find people. How, why, etc. Hopefully I get to. So science is largely anchored by scientists. We tend to, at least we ignored that for some time. In every aspect of it, when you're reading, when you're trying to learn, you look for key advances by people that you know have done well in the past. When we try to evaluate, we look for people who we believe have the expertise to provide the input. And we're trying to fund. We look for people who have a proven record. So the question is, what can we do to make it easier, possible, to find scholars on Google Scholar? Well, the first challenge, which Molly thankfully illustrated before I even had an opportunity, is how do I identify publications by a particular author? Next, how do I keep them up to date? Who keeps them up to date? And then how do I allow at least in my mind, the crucial pivot between when I'm looking for information, when I'm looking for people, and back when I'm looking for information? Because ultimately, people are sort of the intermediary to the information that in most of the cases, not always. Many times it's the people you're looking for, but intermediary to the information you're trying to get to. If I can do this, if I'm able to solve some of these challenges, it provides me with additional opportunities. If I know who you are, can I do a better job of helping you find what you need to read? Another thing that was brought up earlier, saying, oh my God, there's a shitload of stuff out there. So what will I talk about? I'll try to go through this relatively quickly. I'll talk briefly about author disambiguation, the approaches that we take to figure out which papers are yours in a way that allows authors to actually set it up quickly. Or to put it differently, the goal that we had put together, a senior faculty member, a 25-year vintage, should be able to set it up in 5 minutes. If you haven't done it, you have failed. The next is to be able to integrate it with Scholar so that you can do the pivoting between, when you're looking for authors, you should be able to find authors. When you're looking for papers, you should be able to find papers both at the same time, and you should be able to flip back and forth. Finally, which is from my point of view, one of the big benefits being able to do such an analysis brings, is to help you find papers that you may not otherwise have considered reading. Most accomplished researchers know of work by other leading groups. However, today, research worldwide is done by many people. Some of it, even though not from leading places, can be impactful. So how do we go about doing this? This has been a known problem for a very long time. Not just in this field. Also, it's a fun problem to play around in machine learning. Because for most machine learning people, it is their own field. They can demonstrate this to their peers and say, woo-ha. So what do? We build, like most machine learning things, we build a statistical model trying to group, to essentially cluster articles by authors with the same name. So for many people have the same name, we try to create subclusters within that, taking into account all the different co-authors, the journals they publish in, the research areas they are in, the affiliations over time, and as they evolve over time, the text of the articles. It's a large, complicated, messy, multidimensional model. It gets really interesting in some parts of the world where a small number of last names cover pretty much everybody. People who, I'm not sure, a lot of people nodding yet. In China, roughly about 200 last names cover 95% of the authors. And we make this life really interesting by using initials instead of using the full names. So an Echezang publishes with Echezang doesn't tell me anything. There are too many of those examples. We shoot, our goal in building this model is to shoot for very high precision so that we should be right, try not to be wrong, but not necessarily get every paper in the single cluster, not try to build one single group for one given author. Let me explain why. people work in multiple different areas. Over time, their areas of interest, their groups of people they work with evolve. If you try to collapse those together, it's extremely difficult not to collapse unrelated things together. Now, this is not actually a problem, as I will point out. What we do is we allow things to break. We allow there to be multiple groups for a single author. We try as hard as possible to bring them together, but we do allow them to break. And then we try to make it really simple for the authors themselves to group them back together. See, for the author to distinguish between three groups that I present to you is trivial. I can recognize my papers like that. So what we do is we take it as far as we can automatically, but then have a final disambiguation step that's human. And the key to making this successful, to meeting our 5-minute for a senior faculty goal, is to make it really, really simple. Okay, what exactly did I do here? Okay. So to give you an example of what you would see if I used just my last name. When you come in, and many of you may hopefully have set up such a profile and you know what I'm talking about. When you come in, we will look up your name and present you groups of papers associated with your name. What I'm showing up there is what you would see if you just put in my last name. The second of these is mine. For me to look at these three and say, whoa, I know which one that is, I click on Add All 150, and I'm done. Now, some people may have to do that twice, but that's not a lot. Once they have done that, now I know who you are in terms of papers. And future publications, I can automatically identify because they will group with the publications that we already know about. And then once you have set it up, the updates, the additions, the changes can be entirely automated. You can choose to review them. That's your choice. What we find is people overwhelmingly choose automated updates. Because when they see the results of what the groups are, they see that it pretty much always works. That confidence allows them to turn on automated updates. What do you get? Well, you get the list of all your publications like that without having to key in stuff. You get citation-based metrics. You get potentially links to your co-authors. We automatically identify who your co-authors that have profiles are. And you can choose to add them to your profile, or you could choose to remove them. Depends. Sometimes we have seen both kinds of behaviors. You can follow all your citations. You can see who's talking about you, in what context, maybe disparaging your work, in which case maybe you can follow up with them, or send kudos. People can follow your work. Now that there is a single entity associated with a given author, it becomes a lot easier to follow work by people who have relatively common names. And, of course, personalized recommendations for articles that you might be interested in. To give you an example of what such a profile looks like, some of these we put in, some of these the author puts in themselves. The name, the affiliation, the areas of interest, the links to homepage, and the email affiliation, all of these are put in by the author. The papers and the citation metrics are all computed automatically. And they are updated as the scholar index is updated. Note that we present 3 metrics, 2 versions of each. There's the total citations overall, the sum total of all things that have been referenced. There's the H index, and what we refer to as the I-10 index. I-10 index, in some sense, is the set of papers that did not drop through the cracks. 10 is a number based on a bunch of different analysis that we did. If at least 10 people cited you, is the number of papers that have at least 10 citations. If at least 10 people cited you, then that paper was not entirely ignored. I realize that that's not a very strong endorsement, but at least gives you an idea, an approximation of the number of articles that may be, an estimate of your total output that was somewhat significant was noticed. We also compute, as I mentioned, 2 different versions over all time and over the last 5 years. As we all know, people's productivity and people's relevance changes over time. One of the complaints about aggregate metrics of any kind is that the older you get, the better your metrics look, which in some ways is not necessarily wrong. Hopefully you have had more experience, but maybe not the most recent experience. You can click on any of the individual articles and get more details specific to that article. So you can see the citation graph. You can see, is it continued to be referenced, or was it referenced in 1972 and thereafter there's a long gap? How well does it work? Do people use it? Do we get to our goal of maybe not 5 minutes, but 5 minutes for senior faculty? So what we find is people everywhere use it, both people who are not cited very often, as well as people who have hundreds and hundreds of papers. Most authors opt for automated updates, and we see it from all countries, all areas, all languages. To give you some examples, this is the results you get if you just type in edu, which is people who have indicated a US institutional affiliation. This is the most cited. The results are in the order of total citations, so you will see that way. The point I'm trying to make is if people with such a large number of papers can set their profile up, it must be easy. To take another example, UK, maybe the US are picky, maybe UK, Italians. So that's true everywhere. So why does it work? This statistical model is actually quite effective. It's able to achieve the goal of high precision. We do give up some recall, but the recall trade-off is actually fairly small. And it doesn't have an impact on the usability of this system because, as I mentioned, it's very easy for people to collapse a small number of groups of their own papers. For most authors, it takes 5 to 10 minutes to set this up. It also enables a whole bunch of other useful services. So for that 5 or 10 minutes, you get a lot. So flipping, this is, OK. I will finish in, let's see, 3 minutes. If you put in, if Molly had set up her profile, you put in Molly's name, you would see.
If I'd known.
If you clicked on my citation that appears on every single Scholar page, where you would have been able to set it up.
I just sent you an invite.
So it shows up right there. If you're looking for people, they are included in the search results in addition to the papers associated with that name. You click on them, you go to their article. You can also click on any of the interests that people have self-identified, and you see other researchers who have declared the same set of interests. Finally, once I know what your papers are, who you publish with, what its relationship is with the rest of the publication space, and how it evolves over time, I can begin to guess what might be of interest to you. So we center this around author profiles. We do the analysis. We leverage the citation graph. And then, having built a model, we scan all newly published articles looking for things that might be of interest to you. When you come to Scholar and you are logged in, you will see a sample of recommendations right there. What you're seeing there, of course, is recommendations for my lovely wife, since I have stopped publishing some time ago. You click on that, we provide you 2 different versions of recommendations. People have different levels of tolerance for recommendations. Some people want things exactly on point. Some people want things broad. People who want exactly on point don't want to waste time. Other people worry about what they call filter bubbles. So you can see things that are quite exactly fitting, or you can, on the top, there's top and all. You can click on top and all. By default, we show you top. You can click on all to see things that are maybe somewhat further away from your original. Finally, if you want to be able to do analysis of grouping, associating information, papers with any sort of entity, individuals are sort of the key intermediary, the key first step to be able to do that. If you want to cascade further disambiguation for institutions, for funding agencies, for approaches, for areas, that is what will allow you to be able to build if you can collapse these things relatively easily. Finally, I mentioned several times along the way the problem of being able to help people find what they need to read. We believe that this has helped us do some of that. There's much more to do there. Thank you.
Takes a breathe and then. Yeah. Right. And last speaker before the discussion panel is Jennifer Lin from PLOS, talking about PLOS article level metrics.
Thank you so much to Jonathan and all the organizers for this incredible workshop that have convened us here today. Let me try to arrange this. Okay. My name is Jennifer Lin. I'm a senior product manager who is in charge of the article level metrics program at PLOS, and I'll try to keep within the 10-minute time frame allotted. Please do feel free to grab me before the end of the day to elaborate on any or all of the things I will mention. Then we're going to play a little game. This is an eye. It comes from somewhere. Does anybody recognize it? Oh, goodness. Okay. That was way too easy. Yes, that is correct. But the point, you guys weren't actually supposed to get it. Say you didn't get it. My point still stands, that context matters. We need the bigger picture. And in science, we really haven't had that for quite a long time. I mean, we know that a paper is published, and we know that things happen to it afterwards, and then eventually it gets cited. And it gets picked up by Google Scholar as well as an array of other citation indices. What happens in between? A lot of valuable sharing, discussing, recommending. All of this activity surrounding a paper is what we consider as very important context from the perspective of knowing what this research is, evaluating this research, being able to use and reuse it. This green bar is supposed to be a very silly progress bar. I feel like we have made great strides as a community, and not just at PLOS, but with many of the other players that have entered into the space, thinking about this, building things. At PLOS, what we did was in 2009, we started building this application that started capturing much of this activity once a paper is published. It is now freely available. It has always been freely available for all PLOS publications. To date, there are, I think, about 125,000 articles, and we have so far in the application have 20 data sources or outside sources for which we can capture some form of article engagement. And this article engagement, very diverse set of modes, not just citations, we all are very familiar with, but also usage. We feel that it is something of importance, and to what degree and of what kind, that is left up to each community, and will never be defined per se. But how often it is read, by whom. Eventually, we hope to be able to provide that, and the number of downloads, not just on our site, but at PubMed Central, and potentially in the future, other types of large-scale repositories that would be able to provide that information on a systematic basis. Altmetrics, which we've elaborated already in the previous panel members. This is a very large bucket, and I feel that grouping them all together does quite a bit of disservice, really, in terms of showcasing exactly how different some of these services really are, how different the numbers that we get that come from each of these, and what type of meaning we can apply, in fact, to each of them. From our perspective as a publisher, once we collect the numbers, we know that these numbers can be very, very valuable for the service that we offer. Authors want to see the reach of their articles, so we have a metrics tab that specifies the exact raw data for each of the different sources that we have, that we pick up from. We know that researchers want to find relevant papers, so we've built in the ALMs into the navigation backbone, the search backbone. There's still quite a bit more that we are building out and will soon be rolling out over the course of the next year or two. These are article signposts. Tracking these numbers is very, very laborious. Nobody wants to do this. Researchers are completely strapped for time, and they barely have enough energy as well as time to do their own research, what with all of the other responsibilities that they have. And so we built a tool to make it easier for them, at least to get the numbers for any of the PLOS papers that they're interested in. Article level metrics really, in a sense, they're not a product per se. We see them as just part of the backbone of the information, of research content. And we hope that as we move more and more towards maturing these, the technology as well as the understanding in the general community as what they can do, that we will get to that point. But it's just a set of numbers, right? We can slice them and dice them, roll them up, in whatever way that is in fashion or that is helpful. And at the end of the day, every single use case is going to require a very different type of treatment. And one of the ways in which we've created a tool, one of the ways that we did to make this easier on you is to actually have a tool where you can select that collection of articles, see a report of the numbers that are attached to these articles, as well as get a basic set of visualizations that may help to surface some of the things that you're looking for. As I mentioned, they're just raw numbers. You can tell so many different stories with them. And this is one of the visualizations that people often see when we have PLOS representatives talking about ALMs. I won't go into depth as to all the things that we find fascinating about this, but essentially what this graph shows is amongst the entire corpus of articles published last year, these are the different types of engagement with our research content. So January 2013 to January 14th, 2014, a little bit over a year. It's fascinating to see that the PLOS research articles are just as often being tweeted about as Facebooked. I think there's a lot of conversation in our community about tweets, about the role of sharing via Twitter. But not so much about Facebook. I think this number itself just shows us that perhaps we all need to start thinking more seriously about what is this new other channel, this channel that a few hundred millions of people across the world are using. Anyway, I'm going to move on, but I can make this available for anyone else who wants to investigate it later. All the slides will be available. Okay, going back to the little game. This might be a little bit harder. I see that we have a few smart people in this audience since you were able to get to the Mona Lisa. Anybody recognize what this is? I intentionally didn't blow it up. It is a smokestack or funnel, and it belongs to a ship. The ship itself, a few of you really smart ones might also recognize. But I use this because the whole point of article level metrics are, in fact, that it's a dynamic capturing of what is going on with a single piece of research content, not just at one point in time and never to be had again, but that it is a constant living and evolving thing, we can figure out what happens to it later. Sometimes time really matters. Time is part of context. This smokestack is part of a ship. That ship sank. So we need even broader context for these numbers. And not just that only PLOS articles have them. Increasingly, we see many other publishers that are displaying them through other services. So we can get a count, say 1468. What does that mean? What type of activity is behind it? We see more data harvesters, in fact, and there have been studies shown, I can share that research, where they looked at the numbers that have come out from these various studies. And in fact, 1468, surprisingly enough, does not equal 921. So what do we do with these raw counts? We need far more context. This progress bar, it's actually not an accurate representation in my mind as to where we are on that. We are only at the very beginning. Context doesn't just happen. We need to build it, and what is the most basic thing that we need in order to build it is more data. And so the current work that PLOS is interested in, as well as a number of other partnering organizations, as well as other publishers, is that we need to move from discrete publisher efforts into an industry-wide system. And we need all of this to come into play so that we can, as I was mentioning, get more data that is collected in an openly fashion, made available not only to humans on a ad hoc basis, but to machines. It needs to be trusted by the community, audited, as Nettie was saying, and it needs to be not just for the biomedical and life science community, but across all research areas, across all publishers. I have some very exciting news that has not been announced publicly. We expect that it will happen probably around next week. But Crossref Labs, as of last July, took the ALM application and then they downloaded it and they've been working with it. It has now since scaled to be able to process and collect data for 12 million articles. When it launches next week, it will only we will start with the first 12 million that reflects all articles within their collection published since 2010. If you're familiar with their collection, I think it's over 125 million articles. They are ambitious, but we have to begin somewhere. So for the first time ever, once this happens, there will be data for all the articles that are included within the Crossref's collection, and that it will be openly available. It can be tested. You can take that entire set of DOIs, download the application, run it yourself, and see if you get the same results. We need more bibliometrics research because right now we have very little idea as to what these metrics mean, not just for the entire scholarly community, but for each specific discipline. And we also need to have a better understanding for this in order to use it appropriately. Is it best used, and in what way should it be used for assessment, for formal assessment, informal assessment? I think some of these, the ways in which metrics are used, we've talked long and hard about it, whether it's promotion, whether it's for funding. We feel that we're very far away from that, and we need to start doing bibliometrics serious research before that point happens. Thankfully, there are a number of groups that there are vanguard groups already leading this work, and we are really excited to see what comes out of these groups, as well as other labs that are interested. We need infrastructure, and I think that we're really appreciative that NISO has taken the leadership and really kicking this off. This is really, really critical if this is going to be part of the standard ecosystem infrastructure of the scholarly community. We need more participation amongst the community, not just consumers, institutions, funders, and researchers, but also the producers of the content, the producers of the tools that will make use of the content. Once the Crossref Labs ALM data becomes available, we hope that it will be a great opportunity for those who are interested in building these tools to start ingesting it and actually making it fully available for reuse. one of the things I'm going to put a plug in that does connect to this is a new experimental site called the OA Sandbox. Many of us have felt that there are a lot of really interesting tools that enhance the engagement of research, enhance access to research, and the type of experience that publishers try to provide on an ad hoc basis with each of their journals. But it ends up being very, very fragmented as you go to every single different publisher site. What this does is it brings it all together. The entire contents of PubMed Central have been revisualized using the Lens template. If you're familiar, it's a tool that was originally built for eLife. So the entire contents can be viewed through the single platform, and that is just the start, because the whole point of the sandbox, as the sandbox is that you have people play in it. And so we're going to be integrating new tools. If you're interested in being a part of this, we would really appreciate if you could contact us. Okay, so just to wrap up, the general information can be had on the website up here. The ALM reports link is here. Also, if you'd like to play around with the application, go to GitHub and download it. Thank you.
Can we get the panelists? Yeah, we're going to go a tiny bit over into the break because we started a little late, but just about 15 minutes of discussion here. And if we can get the microphones traveling around, I'm just going to retire from here and just let people ask questions.
Marcus Banks from Sam & Mary. For Molly, I think that while we would agree that, I think we could both agree that the citation and the acknowledgement to the professor is not the same as the citation in the reference list. But reference citations, we also don't know until we actually read the paper, even the traditional citations, why they were cited, how they were cited, what the purpose was. So while we want Google Scholar to get better and now we can put profiles in to make it easier, I think we shouldn't assume that the traditional citations had greater status, because we don't really know until we read the paper how they were cited or why or for what purpose.
I do agree. I think that it would be useful. Again, I think it's really useful to hear Jennifer's call to context again. And as I said, I think there's definitely a silver lining and an interest in using this as another tool. We're not, I don't think humanists are necessarily opposed to it. I just don't think we know enough about it to adopt it.
I have to hold it? Okay, I can do that. Here's an issue with context of citations in scholarly publications. Most of them have no useful context. Context for citation is wasting space that can be describing your amazingly valuable contributions. You don't waste that space. What you do, at least in my field, maybe other fields are different, is you put a tag with 2 or 3 different words, creating a phrase, then you cite about 11 different people who happen to have worked in that area and say how you are different from them. The one significantly different area that I know about where citations come with tremendous amounts of context is law. Google Scholar, for people who are here who may not know about our alter ego, where we make US case law available for everybody and build a search over it. In law, citations are used to build arguments, not say my stuff is worthwhile or my stuff is different. Places where you use it to make an argument based on other existing arguments, citations are detailed and are worthwhile analyzing. When we build a search for case law, We explicitly take that into account. We group those citation contexts. You can see them and you can see that they are useful. But the call for looking for context, while I understand the desire for it, may not get you much.
So just a quick note to follow up about citations per se. And this is also to follow up on my point about the importance of bibliometrics research. There was a study, and I need to pull that up, and maybe someone can tweet it around if they already know. But there was a group of bibliometricians who researched how different communities cited, and the nature of the citations, whether they were, say, positive, negative, or neutral, the neutral category usually belonging to references to protocols, et cetera. And it was quite varied. They limited it to just a few select communities in the life sciences area. But the results were interesting. They found that, in fact, while there is a large spectrum of possible ways in which a citation can carry valence, by and large, these communities did not negatively cite. And I think that it was like 80-some+% of all the citations were positive references only, and then the remaining amounts were neutral ones, methods, protocols, et cetera. So I think that there are studies that have been done that do give us more understanding and more context. That said, there's still quite a lot to do, and to your point, Anurag, it is very difficult.
I'm Ben. I'm a postdoc at UC Davis, and I'm also a representative of the postdoc union. So I have a question. Like, it's very good that we move away from this pure citation-based impact factor and so on, but it all assumes, like these Altmetrics, that actually the author list actually reflects the contribution of the authors. And we from the university, from the postdoc unions, we get a lot of complaints from postdocs, obviously, that they are not rightly rewarded in the author list, that people just leave them out, that the PI says, oh yeah, you left already, we're not going to put this on the list anymore. How do we actually tackle this issue that people are maybe not even be mentioned in articles even though they contributed to the work, in the first place, and which is a big problem, I think.
So when you study something, whatever your field of area is, if there is no signal that you can build on, the approach of building metrics will not take you where you want to go. If your sample per se doesn't contain what you're looking to quantify, then those approaches won't take you there. This isn't the place to ask that question. It's a good question. It's a question to ask in a different scenario in which, why is that information not being made available? Why is the credit not being provided? The mechanisms of evaluation cannot help in that particular scenario.
And yes, I do agree. It's a very different problem, but I will add that it is being addressed by large numbers of interested groups within the scholar community. The problem of author contributorship, I think, is there are groups. I know that Amy Brand was one of the leading members in that community, and there are quite a number of other ones. This is something that will entail smart people as well as the cooperation of publishers and other mechanisms to try to make use of what actually results from those new processes.
So I just want to follow up on that comment about citation, and as we move into interdisciplinary publications, a lot of the discussion up to now has been focused on deep disciplinary discussions, like PLOS, for example. Usually it's a product that is recognized as sound within the particular domain that they're publishing. But once you go down to the more integrative discussion, it becomes more like a law case. You're bringing from multiple perspectives. And I'm just wondering if we might want to start imagining a different way of citing in the reference list, how the particular reference that you cite, why you cited that, what are other citations. You know, once it's electronic, you can be more rich in terms of how your thinking emerged onto the paper. It's not just empirical representation, it's the interpretation of the empirical results that you have, or even much more of a design perspective that you're representing. In research articles, there's more opportunities now to expand what we mean by research, as opposed to just simply finding something first. So my question is, would Google Scholar, for example, create some kind of representation for the author to actually annotate the reference list with 5 or 6 metrics, and let the author, give you more statistical results?
If I see a lot of that, yeah. The point is, I am not holding my breath for that sort of detail, largely because the page count limit again says, any space I use for describing other people's work is space taken from my work.
Hi, I've got 2 comments. My name is Eric Kanza. The first one about the question about crediting postdocs not getting appropriate credit in publication. I think maybe this is also one of those areas where open notebook or open data, those kinds of things can actually help, because that can help surface what's behind research that might be presented in a more distilled and narrow form in a conventional publication. But my question for the panel is, we seem to be focusing a lot about metrics and about evaluation around the sort of the tenure track class of researchers, which is really an increasingly very narrow segment of the academic workforce. And I'm just wondering, lots of thought, lots of energy, lots of discussion about these people. What about, what of this, what of Altmetrics, what of the kinds of things that you're thinking about would have any sort of, how would it play out with the larger segment of researchers who are in very different kinds of career tracks within and between and all that around the academy? Thanks.
Let me jump in really quick. I mean, I think to the extent that there are particular outputs from these scholars' work, be they on a tenure track or not, that may very well dovetail into the type of activity that is being captured. So blogs, I think, are increasingly being understood as a venue for extensive scholarly critique, and it is increasingly used as a platform for researchers to share their understandings and their commentary on their work as well as others. Now, a blog is very different from an article, but insofar as right now there is a blog piece that is written which comments, references, and links to a PLOS article, we will be picking that up. And that can make its way somehow in one form or another to whatever their portfolio is, be it for a tenure committee or something else.
From the perspective of the humanities, there are many more people like me, alt-ac types, and people who are independent scholars. And it's a question of incentive. Luckily, it doesn't matter what the metrics look like in my case, because it's not part of my merit review. What's more important is running the day-to-day operations of the Humanities Institute. That said, I was writing down a question I had for Anurag regarding Google Scholar and understanding how it might be useful to me in my next project. And that is, again, incentive. Why would I get on Google Scholar if not to measure my own work and the impact of my own work? But it would be a great networking tool and a way to connect with other people around an emerging topic. So that's, I think, how it might play out for people who aren't necessarily being measured for their output or their impact. But I see it as a really potentially useful tool.
And I guess someone usually always has to mention this in any panel about altmetrics or article of metrics. Just a reminder and to frame this discussion and the thoughts that we exchange here within the larger kind of assumption that this is only one small aspect of evaluation if we're talking about formal evaluation. That this is no saving device. This should never substitute, true, deep understanding of a scholar's larger, contribution, things that go far beyond research outputs like papers.
Over here. Just a very quick comment on the references. The reason 80% of them, at least in life sciences, are positive is very simple. In your lab, when you know that a paper is crap from another group, you'll tell everybody in your lab, everybody knows, you'll say it to your buddies. When you're publishing a manuscript, you'll never say it's crap. What you're going to say is there's some controversial results and cite 10 different papers. You're never going to point the finger, and that's the real reason why we will never have negative references unless you crowdsource it or there is a completely independent editorial body that's going through references and deciding is it a positive or negative one. Because these are the people reviewing your work, and top tenured professors, this is what they do, right? This paper's shit, but when you write about it, interesting, somewhat controversial result.
Obviously, you don't read my blog. All right, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you very much, everyone. And we start back up at 2:30 exactly on time. That's the Chancellor of UC Davis who will be here.